Hey everyone, Mark Tenlow here. I would like to talk about the topic of the vitriol of youth. What I mean by this is when I think of some great artists like Mozart or Beethoven or Shakespeare, they all have a certain energy which they take with them through adulthood, which is developed in youth. And I think that in comparison to my own life, there have been times in my life where I have touched greatness with my art, with my music, my writings, my poetry, but not being able to sustain the um, energy to make myself into a great artist and prolific artist as that. There's a big debate on the internet nowadays, but been going on for quite a while about whether quantity or quality is more important. And I think it's a matter of both quantity and quality. So if you think of someone who um, writes a great piece and never writes a great one ever again, for some reason that person hasn't mastered his art. And I've done that a few times. Like I've written a great song or something, and for some reason I haven't developed it, or no one's acknowledged it. I put it aside, and because mental health authority have invaded my life, or the police have invaded my life, I haven't been able to develop my gifts or my talents or my great idea into something really, really big. So that's one of the reasons why um, I'm not as I'm not in the same category as someone like Beethoven, who developed great music through his entire adult life. Although apparently he wasn't as prolific as Mozart, or not quite as prolific as Mozart. Mozart was a genius in some ways, and I think he died young. I get the feeling that he died young because his brain overheated or something. I mean, that's kind of a weird theory to have, but I'm just trying to give you the idea that Mozart was such a great figure that he was almost out of this world. He wasn't fit for this world, and he, if he knew how great he was and how pathetic his music was, his mind would probably just explode, with the pathos that he generated for through his art. Um, so I think that being creative energy is something that there's something to do with maturity, something to do with youthfulness, and it's like sexuality. Sexuality is an art in itself in some ways, but at the same time, you have your greatest sexual moments when they just start, when they're just beginning, when they're fresh. But at the same time, they're immature. They're not fully developed. They're not like an art form or something. And this is something that really eludes me. I'm trying to come to grips with the idea that, okay, all humans have energy, right? And we all have energy that lasts forever in certain ways. For example, my eyesight I believe, it's expected to last for my entire life. I'll be able to see for my entire life. Although my eyesight will blur, that vision can be restored, and it's an energy that will last forever. It's a mechanical thing, which I believe, which will probably last for my entire life. And it's the same thing with the brain. If the brain learns how to function and how to create great art, it can do that and reproduce that great art through a longer period of time, 30, 40, 50, 80 years. So the idea that that great art is elusive is a very interesting one to me. I believe that if you don't have tiredness, if you're not fatigued by producing great art, you can produce great art endlessly. like Beethoven, his great works in his later years were at least as good as those in his earlier years. Um, Although there's an idea that maybe, like, okay, let's take the idea of Shakespeare, the opus of Shakespeare. Shakespeare's works, Shakespeare peaked. You might say that he peaked in his 40s and 50s. I'm not sure how old did he live. Let me just try and think. I think he lived to about 56. When he created The Tempest, which is his last work, there's an idea that he was fatigued and that he had lost some of his energy and his vibrancy from some of his greatest works. And, you know, when he created Hamlet, it was 1600. He would have been about 36 years old when he created Hamlet. So his greatest works were created at a time when he was still quite young. And as he grew older, his sense of life and his sense of energy may have diminished somewhat. Although he was always aspiring to greater and greater stuff, with The Tempest, for example. So I'd like to know whether my greatness as a poet, for example, can be regained, whether my greatness as a big issue vendor or seller of magazines can be regained, whether I'll always have that energy, because I feel sometimes that I'm a little bit tired, and I'm just wondering whether that's an example of energy that cannot be regained, that is lost. And the vitriol of youth is something that that I will lose over the years as I grow older. So that's something that I just wanted to think about. So I think artists, for example, great visual artists, have that energy more well contained, because art doesn't require great energy to think out things. I'm not sure if that's being prejudiced against visual artists, but I get the idea that visual artists do not need great mental exertion as you might need when you're writing music or when you're composing a novel or something. I'd like to know the science behind this. I'd like to know if there are any artists who lose their energy or their imagination, or become decrepit, or lose their inspirationality as they grow older. It's something that really fascinates me. So if you have any thoughts about this topic, leave them in the comments below, and leave me a like and subscribe to my channel. I'd be very grateful for that. It's an interesting topic, and I think one other example I want to bring up is Greta Thunberg, because Greta Thunberg is an example of the vitriol of youth. Greta Thunberg is someone who is very wise for her years, but I'm not sure whether she'll continue that in her later years, because I think she's reached a point where she's achieved greatness at a very young age. And when you achieve it too young, as in the case with some people like Macaulay Culkin or child film stars like Shirley Temple, you can lose that inspiration when you grow older. And I think that that's something that we have to be mindful of, and to study as a science. It's something that's really interesting to me. Alright, I'll leave you there. Hope it's some food for thought for you, and I hope to see you again on another video. Bye for now.